shoot.
Okay. All right.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bush. I'm a member of the faculty here at the School of Information at UC Berkeley. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce my longtime friend Dale Dougherty, who they say is the founder and executive chairman of Maker Media. But I've known him since about 1990 when he was founding a startup publishing company called O'Reilly Media with his friend Tim, where he developed the first end-user application to get on the internet called the Global Network Navigator, the first book about the internet, the whole internet catalog, all kinds of stuff like that, the history of internet that changed mankind. And now he's doing it again with the Maker movement. So it's really fabulous to have Dale here. He's been a long-time friend of the iSchool, but it's been too long since you've been back.
Yeah,
so
it has been a long time.
Back to the iSchool.
Thanks, Bob. Really nice to be here. Thank you. So I think I'm wired and don't need this. Is that right? We can use that for questions. So really nice to be here. I taught here an electronic publishing class. It was maybe about 4 or 5 years. It was like 99 to 2004, something like that. And Hal Varian was dean. I enjoyed that. But I'm going to give you just a little background on things. I'd love to just engage in conversation, see what you're interested in. This is a pretty interesting area, and I think it's depending on where you want to take the conversation. There's really lots to talk about. This year we celebrate our 10th anniversary of Maker Faire in the Bay Area. How many of you have been to Maker Faire? Good. So, I'm kind of proud that we got to 10 years. Anything you can kind of keep going for a decade is pretty amazing, especially in the Bay Area where you're onto something else after a year or two, it seems. But I'll be talking a little bit about that. Some of this will come out in my talk, but you might want to ask other questions of what is this maker movement? Why did it happen? Why? What are some of the drivers of it? And what does it mean today, and where might it go? I started Make as a magazine, partially because that's what I wanted to make. I like publishing. I'd done books. I'd never done something that was really visual. As Bob mentioned, I did websites, but I thought there was something you could do that was more beautiful and design friendly, print magazine. And so I started that about 11 years ago, and I was almost kind of influenced a lot by old magazines like Popular Science and Popular Mechanics. They kind of always had a crazy car on the cover, or a flying car, and they were. Yet, if you go read them, they were. In many ways aimed at kind of a hobbyist, aimed at a personal project. They weren't like so much of the magazine, and especially in technologies oriented in 10 years ago around a technology like laptops and I just wanted something that was kind of how do you use technology to do cool or fun things. My basic idea from was that I thought we'd be hacking the physical world the way we were hacking software. Like we wouldn't just create applications on a computer, but we'd create them in rooms. We'd create them in our homes. There are things that move. Robots are different than desktop computers. And I thought we'd kind of lost, or we're losing some of the knowledge in ways of how to do stuff practically, how to tinker, how to make things. And I thought just it would be interesting in the way that we had cooking magazines. If you want to be a cook, you read the recipes, but you get to know who people are, and you kind of repeat that stuff, and that's how you become a good cook. And I thought for a lot of this sort of remixing of technology, we wanted to create those recipes, projects. And I was also influenced by the open source world of software, where everything's organized as a project. People contribute to projects. Projects have a name. And so I wanted this to be a magazine full of DIY projects that oftentimes involve technology. And I gave kind of the word makers to our audience in my opening editorial and started using that. It sort of dawned on me as we were putting together hey, we're not going to call them readers or users. We'll call them makers. And that kind of is a seed for some of this. I'm certainly not in a position to take credit for everything that happens in the world afterwards, and don't want to. But, it was somehow the name stuck, and it almost meant something that was like an umbrella term. Like I could be a roboticist, I could be a knitter, and I could still call myself a maker. And that's what we're about. And then I think Maker Faire, we started about a year later, really was that tent, umbrella becoming a tent where we could invite lots of people in to show their projects. And it came out of the sort of the idea that I was meeting lots of interesting makers, and I enjoyed meeting them, talking to them, seeing their projects, and I thought, well, it's a little bit like a science fair, and a county fair, and an art fair, but these are people that don't go to any of those things. They don't fit. So let's mash that together and come up with something new or different. And these are some photos from our last Bay Area fair. Again, if you've been there, you sort of get it. But I just like the juxtapositions of a 3D printed robot that comes from Paris and a scrap yard robot that shoots fire and is made in Denver and is here, Maker Faire. And then we have a robot out of cardboard that dances and does funny things. It's not particularly technically a robot or anything like that, but little kids and others enjoy it. A Meccano robot and a kid giving a chance to control it. And they actually look like pals. Interactive art, we have a dark room and, touching things, interacting with things, having them change as a result of that. I really enjoy seeing that. We had a fashion show with wearables, and it was really, I told the organizers of it, I thought they really hacked the fashion show. Not just did a fashion show, but they hacked it. We had disabled women there modeling 3D printed prosthetics that were designed to be beautiful, not just functional. And when you see them walk down a runway with that, it's very emotional. And it was really beautiful. And then, there's kind of just a lot of people there. It's Michael Christian's sculpture that's made out of locks, and he's dragging a huge key. Those are the, electric muffins. And what I kind of enjoy seeing around Maker Faire is, people see a lot of things, but they also just sit down and talk and enjoy each other. There's a lot to see and do there. Trying to get lots of hands-on things at the fair. This is the Makey project. Where you touch fruit and such as apples and bananas to interact with a computer game or keyboard. And then out of Maker Faire, I think the big surprise for me in this is to see how attractive this was to kids. We designed Maker Faire to be family friendly, and the magazine was really probably aimed at people my age, not necessarily kids. But the Maker Faire, really we started getting lots of kids there, lots of families. And it's one thing if your parents drag you to an event, but I think the kids were dragging the parents there, and the parents were enjoying it too. And we really wanted this, in some ways, to return this as a kind of practice that happens within families. Here's stuff you can do. And this is Quinn Etnier, who lives in San Luis Obispo. And his mom saw that he was kind of getting bored in middle school. Really wasn't engaged in school, and she gave him a copy of the magazine. They came up to Maker Faire, and he really started liking this stuff, and he came back the next year he had built something in some electronics project. And this is Quinn in Maker Faire Rome, where he was exhibiting in a booth. He was a featured maker, but he's not even 13 years old. He has built his own website. He's designed his own products, and he writes tutorial. But because he's 12 years old, his product sensibility is a fart sensor. Like who else? None of you guys would come up with a fart sensor. You might have 10 years ago, but 15 years ago. But I kind of like this is what a fart detector would look like and how it would work. But he ran a Kickstarter, raised $40,000 on it. And then here's him teaching down at Pasadena Maker Space. He's teaching Arduino to basically all adults. And he's wearing an MIT T-shirt because maybe someday he'll go there. But yeah. No. I mean, I think it's just, he's just being a kid. But this is great to see all the makers and speakers in Rome. I got to see the Pope and meet the mayor. But over the years, this is sort of one slide. We began licensing Maker Fairs, somewhat like the TEDx model is. And so last year we had 131 Maker Fairs around the world. This year, over 150. This year we'll have 1.2 million people that physically go to a Maker Faire. Our largest fairs are, two in the U.S. They're, here San Mateo and then New York, and then Shenzhen, China had a couple 100,000 people. It was open to the city and downtown. Maker Faire Rome had 100,000 people. So it's something that has kind of taken off in ways that are, to me, are fairly surprising. This is updated this year. We have 101 fairs in the U.S. and then the rest in Asia. In 2014, we did a Maker Faire at the White House, which is kind of an odd thing. It's kind of like inviting your friends to your grandmother's house and throwing a party there. The carpets kind of like stay off of that, or that's a painting that's thousands of years old. You don't entirely feel at ease there, but a lot of formality and stuff. But it sort of did really give a nice boost. And one of the ways that it gave a boost, the Maker movement, was actually internationally, almost more so than the U.S. When I visited fairs outside the U.S., the fact that President Obama was engaged in this was something they recognized and said, well, America's doing this, we got to get on board. So had those kind of impacts. And this is Lindsay Lawler with President Obama. And Lindsay created the electric giraffe named Russell. And I just, he's like a IT administrator by day, but on weekends, he's worked on this giraffe for 10 years. He goes to Burning Man, comes to Maker Faire. And I just like, there's no friggin' way he goes to the White House, except that he was a maker developing this side project, and people love it. And, they said, let's bring it to the White House. So it's kind of a fun thing to see. Things like Maker Faire in Paris, that's Shenzhen. That's kind of the largest makey robot, fiberglass. Tokyo, New York this year was earlier in September. And the other thing I just mentioned a little bit, like with Quinn's stories, is that makers start off with projects. That's what they bring to Maker Faire, and those projects become products. Sometimes, with many of them, they didn't actually conceive of what they're doing as a product. I was talking to Lisa Fetterman. She's a Bay Area maker who was into cooking, in particular sous vide cooking. Do you know what that is? Immersion bath. Well, they're kind of expensive, $750,000, and she saw they were being used in restaurants. She wanted one that she could afford, so she began designing one. She ran a Kickstarter, raised $600,000, but her goal in some ways was to create something that was valuable to her, and it turns out there's a lot of other people. But her first insight into that was she came to the Maker Faire in New York and set up a table, and she said they made 1,000 sous vide eggs, and there was such interest in what they were doing, and people wanted to know that that's what led them to do the Kickstarter and start going down sort of an entrepreneurial road. Kickstarter told us last year that just in the Bay Area alone, 100 makers, out of maybe 800, had run Kickstarters raising over $23 million. So, if you thought of it as like a contest or something, that there's these kind of prizes out there, that's a considerable amount of money. And it's fascinating because most of what makers do, they need some money. It's cheaper than it was before, but they're not going to get venture capital. They're not going to get a bank loan. And Kickstarter has been this really nice kind of springboard for them to get things going. Now, the only trouble with Kickstarter has been a lot of, especially in the early days, and a lot of people promised things that they couldn't deliver. They didn't know how to build. And you can kind of make a prototype of one thing, but when you promise 1,000 of them, it's a different kind of challenge. And some said it'd be ready in 6 months, and 18 months later, they're getting around to shipping it. So you have really angry people that have given you money. So it's an ecosystem not without its challenges. But I think it kind of teaches one of the premises here, and it's just true of anything really today, but really when you think of developing a product, you're really trying to develop a community, and as contributors, as participants, as stakeholders. And really, one of the things I like about Kickstarter is always, when the early publishing, like in the United States, were really subscription models. Before you publish a book, you went out and got people to pay for it. You said, will you buy the book? And you kind of ran off that number of copies. Some of the oldest books list in the back after the index the list of subscribers. And, some of the early ones, you'll see George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, which actually I thought this has a kind of an interesting impact. Is kind of like a social network. It's like these are the other people that have this book and are interested in this subject, and you might want to connect to them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on technology, and I think you probably know a lot of this, but I think kind of the kind of trends that this has taken advantage of is cheap electronics, widely available electronics, the standardization of platforms like Arduino. Prior to this, a lot of this kind of platform would be custom or peculiar. So you and I couldn't talk about the same tools. It's just like, in building websites, you're doing HTML and JavaScript and other things, and it doesn't matter what the subject of the website is, doesn't matter what the application is, you're kind of using the same tool set. And I think that same thing has happened in hardware here, particularly in electronics, and that means the community can share advice. It means that there's easier ways into the community to begin doing things. And I think in the long run, what seemed to just come together was that this is a community that was organized around sharing ideas, sharing products, sharing designs. And you think of a lot of inventor communities in the past, if they didn't actually have communities, they were just inventors. They often worked alone. They held on to their ideas in hope of commercializing them, and they often died frustrated and penniless. So, there's something interesting happening with like the default being sharing in the maker movement. That's one of my favorite. This is that 3D printed robot again, but this is from a guy named Gail Langevin, who's really like a sculptor and an artist and got into this and started. I visited him recently in Paris, and it became an open source project, and I think this is kind of where the future of making really is highly collaborative projects that things come together. The hand from this spun off to be the basis for the design for it. Became a basis for a prosthetic limb, and a group researched that and made that happen. But actually, that's the limb. From Maker Faire Rome, and we covered that in the magazine. I think the most interesting, so, I talked a little bit in some ways, I think makers are a source of innovation, like an untapped source. They can play by different rules. They can do things that maybe not be commercially successful at first. And in many ways, that's what open source software did. It allowed people to work on projects in niches that large software companies didn't think were profitable, and they kind of discovered those. But I think the thing that I'm most interested in the Maker movement is its ability to potentially transform education, and really around how we learn, not what we learn. I think at the root of this, a lot of this is a form of play and experimentation. And it was when I kicked off the magazine, it was actually driven by this idea. I was seeing largely technology people, but how did they innovate? And it's like everybody wants an innovator. They want to have schools about innovation, but what precedes that? What makes you an innovator? And I really think that the answer is this ability to play without actually worrying about what the outcomes were. They were playing in the sense of like, how does the technology work? if I take it apart, can I put it back together? Can I customize it? Can I extend it? So I think one of the examples that comes to mind here for me is the early 3D printer companies like MakerBot that grow out of the Maker movement. They just wanted 3D printer for themselves. 3D printing existed commercially. It was, again, like as an example, is really expensive, not accessible. You couldn't buy that. So there was a RepRap project in open source, and they were going to follow those instructions, but it was damn hard to make your own 3D printer, even with the open source instructions. But most of them just wanted the opportunity to play with a 3D printer to figure out what good it would, what it was good for. Most of us probably don't think that way. We kind of think, well, what's the practical use of a 3D printer, and I won't buy one until that's figured out. But I think makers were this first wave, like their first wave of personal computers. So like, well, the whole point is you get one of these things, and then you figure out what to do with it. And that sense of play. But I think we're going through a period of almost rediscovery of learning by doing, which is John Dewey's great phrase 100 years ago. It was Maria Montessori, lots of other early thinkers, and then Seymour Papert and others at MIT began thinking about in terms of technology and the constructivist movement. And it was really this very active sense of learning that you built knowledge. You didn't just take it in, you didn't just absorb it. And our current educational system is I think pretty broken, and I think there's plenty of signs that they are beginning to take their foot off the pedal in terms of pushing standardized testing and Common Core, and making is kind of the thing that's coming in its place. From a different point of view, it's really coming in from the grassroots. Teachers are taking it on and bringing it in the classroom. And the reason for doing it is because they want to engage kids. The kids are bored, and they're not learning. So it doesn't matter if you want to teach STEM or those kind of things, but the way we've been doing it really doesn't engage kids. So, this is really the miracle of it, is kids just get it. They really want to do it. And as adults, I'm kind of really interested in how do we resource them, how do we help them. And it's very personal. I think that the thing that I care most about in this is in some ways making means something to people. It has its own reward. It is something that is a form of expression. When you make something and share it with other people, it connects you to them. And this collaborative and social aspects of it are strong. So we've been, part of my worry is someone goes to a Maker Faire and says, I love those people out there. Where do I go next? How do I become a maker? And the answer, at least in some could say, hey, just get the stuff at home and do it. But for a lot of people, they don't have that facility. And so maker spaces, and particularly in schools and libraries, have been things that are really important to, provide an on-ramp for people who aren't makers to learn how to do it, and then provide a place for a local physical community to get together. I think one of the discoveries of the maker movement is actually it's not only physical, but it's also very local, because you need access to machines or tools, but you work and you learn from other people being in there. So it's actually better than just having your own shop. Here's an example that I really like. GE in Louisville, Kentucky built a makerspace, first verticalized makerspace that I know of. They built it around appliances, and they it's an open to the public makerspace, but they were particularly interested in getting makers to innovate around their appliances. Now, the maker's not going to come up with a new washing machine, but if you put a USB port on a washing machine, what would you do with it? Or if you put that in a refrigerator and you could connect a camera, what's an application you would do with that? They've actually seen some interesting things come in. One of the more interesting things, in addition to the community, this is Louisville, Kentucky, and they didn't know, we're going to find makers there who want to come in and do things. And it turned out that they had a great reception. But GE has their appliance park there, and the surprise to them was the number of employees from Appliance Park that said, I've been trying to get this idea through the company for years, and they come into this other place where they have an opportunity to do it. So a really kind of open R&D, I think, is a really interesting impact where you're collaborating with the community. And a lot of people talk about open innovation, but most of the time that's talk. And I think it's really kind of interesting to, especially if you're a company or university, think about how you connect people. Because some of the what GE can offer them is not only the facility to do a prototype and get feedback, but also they have engineers, they have manufacturing processes and contacts where they can help them get to market. One of the big challenges they faced was IP, because it was who owns this thing that's created in their facility. And it actually took them a lot of time, but they end up making the right determination that the maker owned the IP, and if they partnered to do the product, they would tie that together. But if GE didn't take it on, all the rights reverted to the maker. So interesting challenge there. So we could talk about any of these things that I'm kind of interested in, the impact of the maker movement in changing ideas about physical space, manufacturing. I would say that this has not greatly influenced American manufacturing yet, partially because they're not very innovative. But it is influencing Chinese manufacturing and in other countries. What we kind of need in America here is small batch manufacturing to be able to make 1,000 or 10,000 of something, not a million. And you need to kind of swap that out and do the next 10,000 of some other product. So it's more flexible manufacturing lines. I'm working on a project called Maker City, where trying to look at what different cities are doing to connect to the maker movement, either utilization of space, even things of sort of creative clusters. But a lot of regulations in cities were designed when they actually wanted industry out of the city, and they don't quite know how to take, if we put 3D printers and laser cutters in this space here, they wouldn't know what to do with that. Is that, a business, a light industrial? Is it an office space? Is that the equivalent of a Xerox copier? Or is it something that we need to have different insight into? One of the things that's driving the maker movement in China is really taken off, and it's mainly because their economy has been stalling. They're not growing as fast, and they need to focus more on small business formation to have more entrepreneurs, more ability to innovate and do their own ideas. And I think that probably should be our reason as well, to able to launch new ideas into companies. So I just wanted to riff on this a little bit. Is, in some ways I see what we've done is almost in the model of like an association, meaning like association, for instance, I'll give you one, EAA's, Experimental Aircraft Association. They run the Oshkosh Air Show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin every year. And it was formed right after World War II when people stopped insuring recreational pilots. So they passed a law that if you made your own plane, 51% of your own plane, you could fly it. The FAA says, we can't stop you from flying it whether you have insurance or not. And so it gave kind of rise to a whole industry of, kit planes and places to go build a plane, and a whole community that flew planes, whether these or others. People buying old planes and restoring them. And so they have a big fly-in every day. But they're an example of association. They exist to serve their members. They have publications. And I guess the insight I want to share is I think one of the I was talking to someone about this yesterday, that if you want to build community, it's really about getting people to communicate with each other who don't normally do that. And there are a lot of different ways, and we kind of take it for granted on the web. Well, we'll just create a website and we'll have a community. But it's really the act of communication, finding, somehow we were able through the magazine and other things to find that sort of common identity among people that brought them together and gave them a place where they felt comfortable in sharing something creative and in some ways unusual. And the other thing, aspect of that is I think one of the reasons the Maker Faire works is it's an act of celebrating this in our culture. It's celebrating makers of all kinds, and we don't do that, or weren't doing it previously, and that kind of celebration is in many ways just a small but important kind of recognition that what you do matters. And I think the contrary thing that I've done is sort of, print magazine. Nobody loves print magazines today. Nobody really believes in the physical things. But, we bring people together at physical events because seeing is believing. And while there's a lot of great things online, the experience is richer. It's more intense. You actually meet people and you see that they're passionate, and that kind of flows into you in some ways. So those are some of the ingredients that that we've used. I think to kind of pull this together to help create a movement. It was never my intention to create a movement. I have to say, my intention was to create a magazine and create a fair and have people have that be fun and enjoyable. But I would say, going back to the popular science and popular mechanics, it was my goal to make this popular. I early on recognized that there's some group of people that are makers. It's like saying they're geeks in any group, right? And we could be content just serving them. But I thought, in a TED Talk I gave in Detroit in 2009, I kind of first said, all of us are makers, not just some of us. And most of you don't know you're makers because you never tried. You never had the opportunity. And then, particularly with every child's a maker because you might be an athlete, but unless someone plays ball with you or takes you out in a field, you would never know that. And so I think these are important capabilities that we can all develop. And I think the other aspect of it doesn't mean just because you're athletic or because you have tinkering skills that you will be a professional at that. There's value in being an amateur musician, an amateur athlete, doing things that really are part of the community. Some people may develop their skills to a high level, but it's valuable to yourself and to the community just to participate. So let me stop there and just see if you have any particular questions and go in any directions that you want. Bob?
Wait, Bob, before you start, here's the microphone. If you guys could just speak into this. It's not for amplification in this room. It's for our online community so they can hear.
Really fascinating historical perspective about the maker movement. I've always wondered why there wasn't a natural alignment between public libraries and maker spaces.
There is.
But I don't see very.
I do.
There?
It's actually happening. It's a love story, honestly.
Good, because we need to save the libraries.
Yeah, I spent time in that. I was at a meeting with head librarians from major cities, and they're all doing stuff. They don't get as much attention for doing it, but they are looking for a new mission in life. And actually, it's a nice kind of context here to talk about it. They're not beleaguered by a lot of rules the way that schools are, so they can kind of go in this direction. And I've always thought of libraries as kind of a temple of DIY learning anyway, right? You went in and said, I want to learn this, and you ask a librarian, yeah, we've got those books, or we've got this volume over here. So having ways to do things. I visited San Diego Central Library, and again, their maker space is kind of like where you two guys are over there. It's just like a little corner. But they had a Maker Faire, this year, and they're up to like 500 volunteers to come in and help with the maker space, and they're taking over a whole floor, in the future. So a lot of small experiments that, when I've talked to the ALA, and I thought when I first went to American Library Association, a room of 200-300 people, I thought they wanted to be convinced to engage in the maker movement. They just wanted to know how. Like, what should we do? We love this. We get it. And I was just meeting today with BNN, Barnes and Nobles. We did Maker Fairs across all Barnes and Nobles, 650 of them in the U.S. And it really actually turned out really well. And they got a lot of people in their stores. For me personally, it was this sort of combination of two. I love books and I love making, and this sort of brings the two of them together in a really nice way.
I'm just going to point out the city of Berkeley has a tool vending.
Oh yeah, they're one of the early. Go on. Yeah, we've written about them.
Yeah, it's not a maker space, but
right.
They have some amazing tools.
So if you want to rent a power tool for the weekend, you can go to the library and get it. What's that? Oh, yeah, that's right. Check it out. That's right. And we're trying to get some libraries to check out kits and things, where you take an Arduino kit home for the weekend. Yes?
Yeah, I came in a little late, so I
Sorry.
missed the first part. But, I think most of us are makers when we're not doing our daytime job. How do you progress from like a weekend maker to a full-time maker?
Yeah.
And pay your bills?
Yeah. Well, I think I talked a little bit earlier, like, I think we see people, they start with projects and they start getting feedback from people. Literally, people come and say, can I buy that? And they go, gee, I never thought, I just made it for myself. And then they tend to go down the Kickstarter road, Indiegogo, and raise some money to do, if they have an idea that other people. I'd say that in addition to product development, though, many of them end up doing it as a profession, meaning industrial design or engineering are the things that I think one of the ways we're kind of changing engineering is it has been a real theoretically based curriculum, and you're selected for it because you're good at math, and about the only jobs you're really good at or designed for is Wall Street. But increasingly, they're starting to add maker spaces and get those kids that are good at building things. And there's a real job market for that. That they have trouble getting people that know how to take an idea and develop that. So I think it's that. There's also teaching and training and other kinds of opportunities in those areas. Helping other people learn how to do things is another way to. But it's kind of like being a musician. And if someone says, how do I'd love to play music and I'd love to get paid to play music. And, you kind of have to do it your whole life and you stitch together this and that. And it's sort of the gig economy perfectly, right?
So where's the closest maker space, and have you been to the Foundry?
I have not been to the Foundry.
Foundry is kind of our maker space on campus.
Oh, okay.
And
in the Jacobs building?
No.
No, the new one?
It's actually in Sajarda Hall.
Oh,
in the
okay.
basement.
Oh, I have been there in the IEE.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and I think you've inspired a lot of different groups.
Yeah.
To universities and things.
Yeah.
And where's the closest maker space in this area?
There was a couple of, I'm not exactly sure. There was a makerspace for moms in Berkeley that I covered. I thought it was a great idea. Does anybody else know?
There's some in Oakland.
Yeah, Oakland, I know of. There's a couple in there. Crucible is, kind of a great makerspace, but more industrial arts and awesome facilities, especially if you want to do metal. It's hard. I think there's been successful ones like Artisans Asylum in Massachusetts that I followed that are really community-based. Tech Shop, has, made it a business, but I think it's been a struggle for them to really, get enough members to make it profitable. That's why I think libraries and schools and other things, they kind of have the business model baked in, which is, we get paid some other way to do things. It's kind of hard. There's one other one in, sort of on the edge of Oakland, Berkeley, and I can't think of it, and I know they've struggled to keep the number of members. Yes, sorry.
What are your thoughts on moving into the biological space?
Oh,
and do you think
yeah.
that's going well, and do you think it's productive?
Well, BioCurious in Mountain View is one of the first like Biohacking Spaces, and a cool place in Brooklyn called Gen Space. And there's some real activity there. It hasn't kind of come out the way that like electronics has. It somewhat misses its blinky light application. Like I can tinker around and something happens and it's wow, you know. I've seen the things they do. I think there's sort of an intersection of that and maybe food or health that has to happen to make people care more about it. But there are, you know, I run across them in the Maker Fairs, and you know, they sort of belong. When I was first visiting Gen Space, someone was teaching, you know, a class. I mean, like a nightly class lab on you know, biohacking and the three students. One was a journalist, one was a VC, and the other was a student from NYU. And I go, well, can't you do that at NYU? And he goes, no, I'm an urban studies major. They won't let me in the, you know, the bio labs. You know, that's kind of what's sort of wrong about this stuff. We need to get. I think of a makerspace as a library. Even on campus, you ought to have a central makerspace where anybody could come in. I visited a really nice one at Case Western Reserve University, which is in Cleveland, and it has you know, they just opened this $35 million building, six or seven stories. And it's not only open to the campus, it's open to the public. And really fascinating model of what happens when you kind of just open up to letting people come in, use tools, make things, and form community. Yes, sir?
Yeah, you mentioned maker cities. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what are the building blocks that you've seen in different cities which are
Yeah, well, it's still it's sort of a research project to kind of try to figure that out, to be honest. You know, what I've kind of seen is Maker Faire has kind of been the catalyst in a lot of cities for bringing this community together. Typically, the formal government doesn't know a lot about it. They don't know who makers are, what they need. They don't know that they have maker spaces. So on a certain level, getting the top to understand what's happening at the bottom is a key piece of this. You know, but I'm kind of interested in mapping communities. Like Pittsburgh is kind of an early interesting model. You're from Pittsburgh, or you were at CMU. Was it somewhere over there? You know, it's a city that all its funders cooperate really well, and so we have stuff going on in the schools, we have stuff going on in the Science Center, the Children's Museum, you know, there's a tech shop there, and so it really starts to be an ecosystem where, you know, a CMU graduate leaves school and has a place to go work on their project, and then there's funding for that project, you know, locally, and support and experience there. And similarly for kids that want to learn there's, you know, teachers can get professional development and things along that line. So it's kind of understanding, you know, what the maker movement is a lot of informal collaboration, and that's sometimes hard to see for people that aren't in the middle of it. And so this is kind of like, but what I kind of find even in, a person from New Jersey told me he'd never seen this at New Jersey State Department of Education. Said, you know, all this maker stuff's happening in our state, and I've never seen anything like it because everybody's just kind of working it out with each other, you know, across school boundaries or district boundaries or, you know, hierarchies. They're just kind of jumping in and helping each other. And the school system's being hierarchical, very much used to saying here on high is what you should do, and now we got to spread it out and down, and you just listen and absorb that. And this is a whole other activation model. But if you have ideas, you know, or see things yourself in cities, please let me know.
How old, or should I say, how young can you be and get started with this?
You know, well, first of all,
I have nieces, I'm grandchildren.
Yeah,
who are
no,
like 6,
I think,
5.
you know, when I started this and we started seeing kids, I was kind of thinking, oh, we're working with the 9 and up kind of thing. But I see such a push of parents wanting to start a lot earlier. And I kind of used to think, well, we don't have to worry about those really young kids like kindergartners because they get it in school. They've got blocks and all this is making. But it turns out they don't. They've been taking that stuff away just about taking shop classes away in the high schools. They want to get them to read as fast as they can. They want to get them solving math problems as fast as they can. So the kids aren't even playing. I was meeting with an author, Stuart Brown, who wrote a book on play. He's kind of invented the term play science. He was just learning about what that is. And we're just very copacetic, I guess, in terms of thinking about the role of play in learning and exploring. And they talk about play deprivation, that a lot of kids aren't really getting true play.
Dale,
Yep.
I'm a great admirer of your work.
Thank you.
I view myself as a maker of sorts,
Yeah.
so I should give you an advanced notice. I'm an MD by training, a clinical pathologist. The mention of biohacking sort of brought to mind a question that I think applies across the board in making. Has there been an effort to develop a code of ethics? Because let's face it, there is a dark side potentially to making as well. You can make weapons.
Yeah.
You could view the Bostonian bombers as makers of
Yeah,
sorts, of a
absolutely.
very evil sort. Bioethics.
No, not particularly. I think, making kind of comes out of a tradition that actually goes back in medicine and others of self-experimentation, where you were the subject of your experiment. And, you go back and read some of those things, and it's just like, really bizarre. But I think we may need to get there. But there is, I thought one of the more fascinating talks I've been to the year was one at MIT. Eric von Hippel pulled together, and they had a lot of military people there. And they were talking about how, like in Iraq, the enemy was out innovating them, with IEDs, but like simple components, like cell phones and the stuff that was around them. They didn't have sophisticated weaponry, but they could, they could improvise devices that were powerful enough, and it was fascinating because what it had to change in the military's mind is almost allowing people in the field to innovate. Instead of this model like, hey, we got a problem, we got to call back to the U.S. and get that problem solved, and then get it back out here, because one of the with the Abrams tanks, some of the mechanics came up with sweeping devices. We'll just fit them on the front. We'll just start sweeping them off the road. Initially the military didn't like them doing that, and then they kind of realized, well, that's kind of our form of innovation. We need to kind of let that happen. So we may see that, but I think there's the other example was the 3D printed gun. And that guy did a lot of publicity around it, and I think there was a while where I couldn't sort of do a talk or talk to people without, especially press. That was the only thing they wanted to ask a question about, not about 3D printing, but about the 3D printed gun. I go, well, you can make a gun, if you want to go lots of different ways, but there are laws against making them, and this kind of falls in the same thing, There probably are basic laws already that apply here. Anyone else?
So I come from Pakistan, and I've seen software development really take off through freelancing. So where young people get together and they pick up a project online and they do a freelance project. How does that concept, translate into this, hardware making space?
Yeah, it hasn't that I know of really well. The only example I can give you is something like OpenDesk, which it's not exactly what you're thinking, but is a place where designers put up designs for furniture that can be made anywhere in the world, and they get some royalty out of that because you pay for it. There's, of course, Thingiverse and things like that. I've had, where I think that could go in interesting ways, people have said to me, I see something in your magazine that's really cool, but I don't have time to make it. I wish there was someone who would make it for me. But we haven't found lots of really good examples of that where people would pay to have that sort of custom made or problem solved. But it's kind of interesting. I think it's not certainly a bad idea for bringing a group together. You can imagine someone hanging off their Instructables, I will make this for you. It's just like almost, I'll print this book for you or do these things. The challenge is a lot of, like printing a book is kind of the same process no matter what the book is. Each of those projects on Instructables is a different process. And even though the instructions might be accurate, the process that you follow, the materials might not be available, the tools might be really expensive, and so it would be hard to price it. But it's, I think you could kind of pick some things there. I'm really interested in more examples of things that can be locally produced. We have things like SF Made and people kind of trying to represent locally made products. Most of them are food and beverage. And I'm kind of, looking for things that clothing is kind of the third category, garments. But what are the things that people could make locally and you would perhaps prefer them because they had some difference in them, not just because they had a logo on them, kind of thing. Yes?
So I think you bring up a very good thing here. I do lots of electronics.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to make electronics and put made in America,
Yeah.
Including apples and everything.
Yeah.
So making it successful, a maker project, looks like you need connections in China or somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
How does that is that perception true?
Yeah, it is. I mean, they have the supply chain. They have, factories. I think for making anything at scale. I think the only opportunity America has is really in the non-electronic spaces. You're probably still going to buy the electronics from over there, but in some ways, things like Arduino help solve a bit of that problem. But if you're going to need lots of resistors and other things, you're not going to find them here. I mean, you might find them here, but they're going to come from China. And if you have sophisticated electronics or fabrication, it's probably going to come from China. I mean, the thing that I realized in China, you probably know this, is everything's handmade over there. It's not like they're really that able to do complex things. But it's the fact that they just have a really rich ecosystem. But I think things can change over time. Not that will come back to America, but China's worried about Vietnam underpricing them on labor, and that more factories will end up in Southeast Asia and not China. So.
It's okay when those in Southeast Asia are worried about China eating their lunch.
Yeah. I mean,
Seaboard, so
exactly.
it's what it is.
Yeah.
It is interesting, though, to look at products. Very often you'll see they distinguish between where a product was designed,
Yeah.
made, and assembled.
Well, yeah, but I think that was almost like the paperless office that, all the design in the world will just take place on computers and you press a button and it's just made and you get an object back like from FedEx. And what we're actually finding more is that iteration over the physical object. I was just looking at an interview I did a couple of years ago with the inventor, really, of 3D printing. It was Charles Hull, who founded 3D Systems and got the first patent on 3D printing. He called it stereolithography. And Charles Hull is his name. He got the patent in 1985. I think it's really interesting. It's the same year that the patent for the laser printer was granted. Laser printer was commercialized instantly. 3D printing went into high-end commercial markets. But he's saying he was trying to solve the problem that when you had a design, it took you, maybe 3 months to get a product back from that design, and usually it was wrong, and it would be another 3 months to get the next product. And I think, this sort of prototyping technologies around the maker movement is all about iterating very rapidly. And while even the 3D printed object may not be what you end up using, it gives you the form, it gives you the size, and you can evaluate that a lot better than just a 2D image on a screen. So that's been the big win. The challenge for makers is when you go from prototyping to production, everything kind of changes. And materials, tools, and costs. Yes, hi.
Hi. So I was wondering when NASA became involved with the Maker movement. And were they there from the beginning?
No. But maybe we've kind of, I was down at Ames trying to get them to come up and participate. It took a long time to get that to begin rolling along. Now they're kind of really in it and cool. I did an issue, I don't remember the time, but I did a space issue 4 or 5 years ago. And it was really all these guys really were successful. It was just sort of, building an $8,000 satellite using kind of off-the-shelf technologies. And these guys now have the company Planet Labs, and they've put all these satellites up in space, taking, just based on taking Earth photography. But it's kind of incremental. I'd say within the last 2 to 3 years, they've been more serious, and it's getting a little better. But they're the lead. I always thought that I tried to do a challenge with them once because, this is exactly what I talked to them about. They wanted to get more experiments up in space, like in the space station. So particularly experiments that are testing microgravity. And they might have 100 experiments going up, but they would like thousands. And they can't afford to come up with thousands of experiments. They don't even know what to test. So, the idea was let's start reaching out to the maker community. They need to do a little bit more education to do that. But, if you put an Arduino up in space, how does it work? And, how do you do those things? But what would you want to measure and what would you be testing is kind of the chief thing there. Are you particularly interested in NASA?
Actually, I work for Multiverse, which is at that Space Sciences Lab, and I had, in 2010, I had a maker at the fair.
Oh, great.
Won Editor's Choice, maybe.
Awesome. Good for you.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming.
I noticed that there was a couple of NASA things there, but
Yeah.
the ones were gone.
Yeah, in New York, they set up a booth there. I thought it was one of my favorite booths. They brought the toilet and shower from the space station, and I thought and it probably grosses you out, but I'll tell you anyway. You have to form a seal when you sit on the toilet, if you think about it, everything floats. So you kind of have to, it has to be vacuumed out. So, it's just a funny little thing to see what that actually looks like.
Yeah, did you see The Martian?
Yeah. We just did a cover on the Martian movie. Yeah, it's a great book, really a maker book. Yes, sir.
You talked about how the maker movement is making inroads into education, changing the way we think about learning. But it occurs to me, and I'm sure it's occurred to you as well, that making has already been happening in a very rich way in our educational system, but only at certain levels, particularly at the kindergarten level and at the graduate and postgraduate level.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts there of how to maybe draw that.
Well, as I said earlier, that some of the times it's I thought it was actually more available to kindergarten level. It was starting to get squeezed out because of people saying, hey, we're even in the after school space when they go, oh no, we can give them another hour of math or another hour of standards-based curriculum, and then they were taking that away. Grad school, yes, but I'm surprised really. My own kind of visiting places and talking to them. To me, this seems like the most obvious idea that you get people to do stuff and they learn by doing, you go to Georgia Tech and they just a couple of years ago implemented this, but there was a lot of resistance to it. No, we teach them these classes and they don't need to actually practice anything. And they don't need to have ideas about what to do. And in fact, at the end, we're going to teach them an innovation class, but we'll tell them how to think about being an entrepreneur, And but instead of, hey, you just do it. You have it's like being an artist. You don't just think about being an artist. You have to act on it and do things that come out there. But in many ways, there have been isolated outposts in education where people do this a lot, and they were undervalued or out of favor. So many of them, the best remark I get from a teacher in this is, it's something along the lines like, I'm so happy. This is why I got into teaching in the first place, getting kids to do creative things, engaging them, playing, and seeing them develop. And they've really been beaten down by a lot of the standards-based push out there. Okay. Anybody else? Last question? Okay. Well,
thanks so much for coming, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Big hand.